Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. Chad Hyams here. Bob Stewart there. Bob, how are you today, my friend?
They're like not in my normal spot, Chad. You can see my wife kicked me out of my office today, so I'm in the living room. So I'm there as much as it's here, but it's not my normal here, you know?
Well, Bob, I'll say it's better than the episode where I had to record it locked in a closet.
Yeah, you were in a closet.
They were doing work in our home and we didn't have any furniture to hide behind either. So
that's okay. Hey, you know what? I'm really excited today. Anytime somebody makes up a word where you just hear the word and you're like, how come that hasn't been a word forever? We got a guy joining us today that made up like a really cool word, and maybe we'll have him tell the story that he didn't think it was a cool word, but I think it's cool.
You see, Bob, this is why we get along, because I make up words all the time and love to do it, right? There's so many words that I don't think are out there that should be there. And maybe we'll all have to make up some words today. You're right. Let's get to the conversation today, Bob. Our guest today, Joe Mull, is, well, I'm not going to do bio. You know I don't, but he's going to bring some great value. Joe, welcome to the Win, Make, Give audience, or to the podcast, and say hello to our audience.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Chad and Bob. Thanks for having me today, man. I'm really excited to be here.
You know, Bob, before we even have Joe introduce himself to the audience, I want everyone to, that energy that just comes from Joe. Like when I was here, I usually get in here first to the podcast recording, make sure everything's set up. I wasn't even looking, right? I had that window closed in the background. I'm working on something else. Boom, energy just came through my computers. He was so excited to be here. And then he actually was nice to you, which is something I usually prep for people not to bother with. He's just a nice guy.
Hold on. I can change that because, let's let Joe introduce himself. And then I went and stalked him.
And then you'll get bitter.
I went and stalked him on Facebook the other day, so I got a couple bones to pick.
All right. So let's hear Joe, introduce yourself to the Win, Make, Give audience. Who is Joe Mull?
Well, guys, I am a Pisces. I like long walks on the beach. I am tall, dark, and no, I'm actually none of those things. I'm short, squat, and boring. No, probably the simplest way to talk about who I am is from a professional perspective. I teach leaders how to be better bosses and how to make work for everybody. Outside of my job, I'm married to my best friend and the finest human being I've ever met. And she and I have 3 amazing kids who are under the age of 13. And I'm just living that dad life right now while also getting to live that speaker life. And so it's all good over here.
Well, there you go. I know you and Bob will be able to get into the dad life and how it works around this stuff. I thankfully have gotten past that stage. My daughter is... well, let's just say legal to drink, right? She's old enough to be legal to drink. So I've made it through all of that. Bob, you want to get bitter before we get into some...
Okay, so yeah, maybe real quick, because Joe, you're a Pittsburgh guy, and I went and stalked your Facebook. I want to try to find something like connect with people on, and like if I was a Pittsburgh guy, I'd be a Steelers fan, I'd be a Pirates fan, I'd be a Penguins fan. Right. And I think I saw you in all of those environments. I saw you at a Steelers game. I saw you with your Pirates hat on. I saw you with your Penguins jersey. Can I just tell you that I'm still bitter to this day? It's 2023. I think this 18 years ago, in the Seahawks' first Super Bowl. I can remember watching it, and you guys beat us. And, good for you guys. You had the bus, Jerome Bettis. I think that guy deserved a Super Bowl ring. But I'm still bitter, man. I'm not going to lie.
Listen, I've heard all of that from the Seattle contingent. And here's the crazy thing about this. You've won a Super Bowl since then. You won one since you lost that one. You're like sitting here complaining about the loser lottery ticket after you won a lottery ticket. I know, come on, brother, let it go.
It's the Seattle mindset, Joe. All they can focus on is their basketball team who left them, Alex Rodriguez. They can't get past any of this stuff.
Well, so I think I was 2, like the first time we ever won a title in Seattle was the Sonics won one in 1979. But that would have been like my first title as a fan, that 2005 Super Bowl. And so it hurts still.
I really get that. Like I was like a 13 or 14-year-old boy when my beloved Pirates were 2 outs, bottom of the 9th, 2 strikes, about to go to the World Series. And 110-year-old Sid Bream came across the plate for the Atlanta Braves, scored the winning run, and sent them to the World Series in 1991. Yeah. And I've never gotten over it. So I'm with you at least on holding the sports grudges. I really am.
All right. Okay, so enough about that.
Everybody has their sport grudge. You know what, folks? Come into the Facebook group. Win, Make, Give, and tell us your sport grudge, right? I can see George Brett beating the Blue Jays. I We all have that moment.
You know, it's funny, Chad. George Brett was my favorite baseball player growing up. I love
now
that
we don't.
guy.
I'm not talking to you anymore. Okay, so now let's get to it, Joe. Why we're here, and the audience is like, okay, guys, we get it. You're men. You like sports. You're going to talk about. Okay, come join us in the group. Let us know your sports. You made up a word, which is the title of your book. It got Bob all excited. Talk to us about employalty. Right, give us the story first of all of the name of the book.
Wait,
let's get into some of the lessons in there.
A portmanteau, is that what that's called? The portmanteau, when you take two words and you put them together like brunch.
Man, you're nailing the SAT words today, Brian. That is absolutely spot on right. It's a portmanteau.
Totally is Googling it, Joe. Don't give him the credit for anything.
Yeah, employalty is, we're sort of playing a little bit of a trick on the reader here, because you hear the word employalty and you think, oh, okay, that's got to mean employee loyalty, right? And it actually doesn't, right? Employee loyalty is what we've been going for so long in the workplace, right? That employers, in exchange for giving somebody a job, that what they expect to get back is loyalty and dedication and commitment, just because, hey, I gave you this job. But that's not really how it works. We know that there are a handful of conditions that people need to experience in the workplace in order to care and try and give it all they've got at work. And so employalty is a portmanteau of the words employer loyalty and humanity. So what we know right now is if you want to activate commitment in people at work, you have to create a more humane employee experience that actually enhances their quality of life compared to what it has been in recent years.
Okay, is this the whole millennial thing? Right. And right. As I bring that all up, is this because the generation now is we want to feel connected? We want to feel like we're included. Is that what sparked a lot of this change and a lot of these lessons that you're able to bring? Or is this just something that has always been there and people needed to pay more attention to this?
Well, this book was born out of me trying to answer a pretty simple question, which is, where does commitment come from at work? And I've been doing that work for 20 years. And I had a really crazy experience about a year and a half ago when I was on a podcast and the host was interviewing me about where commitment comes from. And we had this incredibly rich 30-minute conversation about it, getting into all the different things that leaders and business owners have to get right in order for employees to join and stay and care and try. And at the end of the podcast, he said, all right, Joe, let me get you out of here on this. Just put a nice bow on this whole conversation for us in one sentence. Where does commitment come from at work? And I went, I don't think I can give it to you in one sentence. And then I like recapped the entire conversation we just had in the world's longest run-on sentence. It was not a pretty moment. And that bothered me, right? I thought, we don't serve business owners and employers well, leaders well, if we can't give you a really clear, simple framework on what you need to get right. And so I took all that work that I've been doing over the years and then spent a ton of time looking at jobs data and hiring data and more than 200 research studies and articles about why people quit or take a new job or stay long-term with a company. And what's clear is that A, there are 3 specific things that employers have to get right, which I can tell you more about in a second. And B, we're in the middle of an era of job upgrading. And it's not about generational differences, to your point earlier, Chad. If you think about the recession that we had in 2008, in 2009, 2 million more people that year voluntarily changed jobs. And then 2 million more people did it here in the US the next year, and then again and again. And last year, 50 million people voluntarily quit their job to go do something else. It's the highest number in the history of its being tracked here in the US, which is twice as more as it was just 15 years ago.
Wow.
So we are living at a moment right now where people are actively pursuing upgrades to their quality of life and the way that their job fits into their life.
50 million, like how many? There's only like 328 million adults in the United States or something like that. Is that right? And if you figure, I mean, that's like a quarter of the workforce, Joe?
Absolutely. There has been a ton of turnover. So in 2009, it was 23.7 million. Last year, it was 50.6 million. That number does not include terminations. It does not include retirements. This is people leaving their job to get a different job. It's remarkable. And that's why you hear so many people right now who are describing challenges around staffing and hiring and turnover, because we are living in the biggest period of worker-free agency probably ever.
Okay, so just to be that guy who asked that question, how much of it do you believe, I'm not right, how much do you believe is COVID related and people wanting to work from home now, people realizing I need to create my own opportunity. How much of it do you think is inspired by the pandemic of 2020?
COVID has played a small but not terribly significant part of it. And here's
Interesting.
why. Because burnout was at an all-time high in the US workforce in 2019.
Okay.
Because we worked more hours a week and took fewer vacation days a year than every other developed nation on earth in 2019. So in 2019, people were exhausted. They were frustrated. They were tired of being treated like a commodity. They were tired of having wages be stagnant for the bottom half of the socioeconomic ladder for 40 years here in the US. And so that's where, really, for 10 years, we had started to see this uptick in job switching. Then the pandemic arrives and takes an already exhausted workforce and just breaks it. So what the pandemic actually did was make us all braver. Because if you think about it, changing jobs before COVID was a major life decision. You'd weigh the pros and cons. You'd talk to your partner, your spouse, your friends, your network. Should I make this move? Then COVID arrives and it injects all this job instability and uncertainty into the labor market. So many people were laid off or had to figure out how to get by with fewer hours or less income. And then they had to do that for 2 years for some folks. And so now fast forward, and people are looking around and their risk aversion to trying something different is way lower. So it's not as big a deal right now to say, you know what, I can make more by trying to go someplace else, or I can have a better schedule or a better boss or a better commute or work from home by trying something new.
So it would have been, I mean, we were headed here anyway. COVID was maybe a tiny accelerant on it or something.
When I do keynotes at conferences and at meetings for corporations, one of the things that I tell the audience that just bends their noodle is that we were going to be at 50 million voluntary quits this year, whether there was a COVID pandemic or not.
Interesting. I think that's really interesting that, as Bob said, maybe it was just a little bit of an accelerant, but it was coming. One of our cohorts, Clint Swindoll, who runs a podcast called Tell Me Something Good, part of the Win Make Give podcast network. If you want to check it out, folks, Clint has always talked about employee engagement, and he talked about, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, right? 25% of them are oh no's, and it doesn't matter what you do, they're never going to engage. And 25% of them are oh yeahs, and they're going to absolutely be loyal, diehard people. And then you got that 50% basically in the middle that are the, people that we're talking about. Now, talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, there are those people that it doesn't matter what you teach me, what I get from the book, they're just never going to become engaged. And there are some people that it doesn't matter how bad I screw it up, barring, legal crimes, they're probably still going to stick in there because they believe in the company or the product or whatever it is. Talk to me a little bit about that thought, Joe, and your take on it.
Yeah, I get asked the question a lot. Do you believe that every employee can become an engaged employee? And my answer is usually yes, somewhere. Right? If we have that oh no group of in a lot of the research it's pointed to is about 17% of the workforce is considered to be actively disengaged, right? Where I act out my unhappiness at work. And if that's the case, I have never seen an actively disengaged employee transform into an engaged employee at the same company unless they go to a completely different part of the organization, right? I've seen that a little bit, but in most places, they need to get on with their life's work somewhere else. Now, for the folks who do come through the door engaged, we know that actually 2 out of 3 workers come through the door with a high level of engagement, but that number goes down to about 1 out of 3 after only 90 days. So we're screwing up a lot of stuff in the first 3 months of hiring, selection, and onboarding. A lot of that has to do with training. It has to do with coaching support. It has to do with unkept promises around here's what this experience is going to be like for you when you get hired. And now I've been there 3 months and no way does this resemble what I expected it was going to be. But for everybody else in the middle, we really have to understand that motivation is not something you do to someone. It's something that people experience when the conditions are right. And that's why we wrote this book, which was to give a blueprint for what are the things that we need to get right. And so I'm going to give you, gentlemen, my 1-sentence answer to that question.
He's got it.
Our podcast brings it out of you.
He wrote the book. He's got it. He's got it concisely. Okay, let's hear it. What's the one sentence?
It took me a while, but once I got it, I got it. I can tell you that commitment and retention appear when employees are in their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss. Now, that sounds overly simplistic, doesn't it? So there are dimensions to each of these. We call these the 3 factors of employalty: ideal job, meaningful work, great boss. Ideal job is about my compensation, workload, and flexibility. If my compensation is right, my workload is right, and I have flexibility around when, where, and how I work, that job fits into my life like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I'm committed and I'm loyal.
Got it.
Then we get to meaningful work. Meaningful work is about purpose, strengths, and belonging. Do I believe my work matters? Does the work I do align with my unique talents and gifts? And do I feel like an accepted, celebrated part of the team? You get those 3 boxes checked, my work is meaningful, and I care and try and give it all I've got. And then that third factor, great boss, you guys know this. There are dozens of things leaders have to get right for one of their employees to look at them and say, man, I got a great boss. But we think that the 3 most important might be trust, coaching, and advocacy, right? Trust. Do I grant trust and earn trust from the people in my charge? Coaching. Do I engage in those conversations to mine people for their ideas and their creativity and coach them to a higher level of performance? And then finally, advocacy, which is quite simply acting in the best interest of another person. So do I care about you and who you are outside of work or just when you're on the job? Do I care about what you're doing when you're here, or do I also care about your long-term career, whether that includes me as your employer or not? So that's the 3 factors of employalty. That's the 1-sentence answer. Commitment and retention appear when employees are in their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
That great boss. My wife is, I talk about her on the podcast often. She's like a sales ninja. She's a really she makes a lot of money, a lot more than I do. She works at with a lot of big.
Whoa. You get paid? Hold on, I thought we were doing this.
Not for this, not for my other job. But she sells to the the biggest corporations in the world, and she's constantly I don't say constantly, but she's occasionally at odds with the people that have been her bosses, and I've watched her over 10 years. Her boss that she loves this guy to this day. He's not her boss anymore, but she still goes to him for guidance. And he is like all 3 of those things. And if you were to ask my wife, what do these other bosses not do that Brian did, or what do they not do that Brian did? It would be these 3 things. She'd be like, I don't know if I can trust them. And she'd be like, they never go to bat for me. And I don't feel like I'm learning anything from these guys. I think you nailed, not that you didn't nail it with the other 2, but that great boss, man, that's nailed.
Well, here's the crazy part. So I have a good friend of mine who works for she works for GNC. I don't think it's a big deal if I name drop them. She works in the corporate office for GNC, and she likes working there. But she will tell you point blank that if my boss leaves, I will go wherever she goes, and I will never work for another boss except for this person. Then when I ask her why, she describes, my boss has fought for me to get paid well. My boss fights to keep my workload manageable. My boss gives me a whole bunch of flexibility around when, where, and how I work. My boss makes sure that I'm only doing the things I'm great at. So when you hear her talk about her experience working with her boss, she's actually describing that whole employalty model, which has made her job a destination workplace. But in her mind, it's not her employer, it's her boss. We know that a person's direct supervisor is the single most influential factor in the employee experience, right? We know that when people quit a job, their boss is almost always part or all of the reason why. That's why we say that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And so this, as being one of the essential factors, is important because we have employers and business owners who still don't invest in the development of frontline managers and mid-level leaders, right? This is especially true in a lot of restaurant and retail environments, right? Scooter's Roadside Diner doesn't have a leadership development program. The chances of the person who is the manager there having really learned how to manage people well are lower because they don't get that kind of training and support. But we need to prioritize it if we want to get people to join and stay.
It's
okay. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was going to say it's Ben. It makes me think, Chad. Ben has this philosophy on the job I do get paid for, not here at the When They Give podcast, but where he wants us to be engaged with not just the people we lead, but 2 levels down. And one of the reasons for that is if I have no engagement with the team, so I've got some directors that sit below me, and then technically that front line, those directors are their boss. But if I don't have any engagement with those people, and they look at, like you're saying, Joe, they look at their boss as the reason why they like this company. If that guy leaves, all of a sudden, I've got a bunch of employees that if I don't have a relationship with them now, and they don't see those same things in me potentially that they see in their boss, all of a sudden now they're they're free agents and they're on the hunt because he or she was that thing that they look to as the reason why they enjoyed their job.
Well, and it even goes further than that. You're absolutely spot on right. But if you think about every degree of separation that you get from those frontline workers creates a greater amount of distance between you and really understanding the challenges those people face every day. Because now you're relying on 2 or 3 sort of daisy chain transfers of information from folks about what their challenges are and what they're facing. So when we look up the org chart as individual contributors, the farther away we get from our direct supervisors, the more it becomes about corporate or about the company. And so I may not have a relationship with you as a director 3, lengths removed from my boss, but if you have articulated a compelling mission and I see you putting forth an effort to keep your finger on the pulse of what I deal with every day, I'm going to instill some trust in you because I know that at least we're aligned and you have my best interests at heart. But if you're not visible and if you're not communicating what we're all doing here and why we're doing it, and if you're not putting people in place who supervise me that I can trust and who are competent, then I'm going to stop trusting you and I'm going to become more and more disconnected from the role.
Okay, let's talk to our audience specific here for a minute, Joe. Now, do we have people who have employees? Absolutely. Do we have people who are running big companies? Yes, they're out there listening. Majority of our listener, I would probably say, is an entrepreneur that is leading independent contractors and has a small handful of employees in the organization. So, with that being said, they're not boss in the sense that I write you a check, right? Yet they are a leader in the sense that you have chosen to come on this journey with me and I am the senior person. Talk to us and our audience about how do they do those 3 things? What are some of the steps they should take? What are some of the things they should stop doing that they've been taught for years to do? Let's help them be better leaders of their people, whether they're independent contractor or a true employee moving forward.
Yeah, no, and you just described me, right? Because I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years. I've got a team of 4 people, right? I run a small business. And so I have to sort of walk my talk here and think about how do I apply all these lessons. And so my own business has been a kind of micro lab for a lot of the things that we write about in the book. So, one of the things that we know that small business owners and entrepreneurs tend to do is they tend to micromanage, right? And I'm not trying to paint with too broad of a brush, but if you've started your business by yourself and maybe it was just you had to be scrappy. You had to do everything yourself. And as you bring on help, it can be harder and harder to let go of things. So my first piece of advice for entrepreneurs or people in the kind of circumstances that you just described is to stop delegating tasks and start delegating responsibilities, right? When I delegate tasks, I say, I want you to do this and then this. And then I want you to do this. And then what happens is people have to rely on me to tell them the next step. I become a bottleneck. I'm checking people's work. I haven't bought back my time. I haven't traded I'm trading one set of problems and responsibilities for another instead of actually freeing up my time to only do the things that I can do in my business. Stopping delegating tasks and starting the delegation of responsibility means that you're going to people and you're saying, look, you are in charge of achieving XYZ outcome, this sales goal, designing this kind of infrastructure around our delivery systems, selecting and implementing a CRM system for our small business. I trust you to go out and make the best decisions that you can. Here's what's important to me. Now go. And then having periodic check-ins around some of those things and resisting the urge to take that work back when it's not going exactly the way that you think that it should. This is where, as leaders, we need to coach people, we need to communicate, and we need to give them a chance to learn and fail. All of that is important because it lands in that meaningful work circle, right? It lands in that circle of I have purpose, I'm valued. It lands in that great boss circle because my boss trusts me to give me responsibility. And it lands in that ideal job circle because I can manage that workload and I have some flexibility around how I get that work done. So we're checking some of these psychological boxes when we do that. there are some other things that I think a lot of small business owners do along the way, or even entrepreneurs who are running big businesses, which is that they oftentimes don't allow enough time for people to learn and maybe fail every once in a while in order to acquire the learning necessary to turn into superstars. So too often we will onboard somebody, we will say, we're going to give you a couple of weeks, it's a pilot program, let's try and get you up and running. And maybe that person doesn't get enough training or support, or maybe there's nobody there who's actively coaching them. And then what we do is we point to that person and say, well, they didn't have it. Right there, that's been a failure. We're going to move on from you. And, boy, good help is hard to find, when what we didn't really do was put the infrastructure in place to help them acquire through time and experience what they need to know to actually be of service to us. So those are the first couple of things that come to mind for me. Do those resonate? Do they align with the kinds of experiences that your audience is telling you that they have in terms of being small business owners and where they struggle leading people?
Yes. Right. I mean, that's onboarding. I mean, we've talked about it. We did a whole talent series where we did a whole episode, Bob, about onboarding, right, last season, because we know that those first 90 days are a make or break. And of those 90 days, day one truly is that one where you're saying they're coming in engaged. How quickly are we losing their engagement?
I didn't know that. I realized, though, like, Joe, that stat you threw out earlier where you were saying, some percentage of people come in and half of those people are disengaged 90 days later. Like, my God, that maybe I knew onboarding, Chad. We've done an episode on it. Like, we spend a lot of time around here thinking about it. We've got training programs to bring people in, and I didn't know that. I didn't realize it was that impactful. Maybe.
And I think one of the things that happens is we expect singular information transfer to work. I'm going to bring my new person in. I'm going to tell them something one time, and now I expect them to know it and act on it. And if you think about what it's like to take a new job, I tell leaders all the time, anybody that you hire is going back to stupid. And it doesn't mean they are stupid, but they're going to feel stupid in the first couple of weeks of the job, because they went from a place when they knew who to call and when to call and how to leverage relationships. And I'm organizationally savvy, to knowing nothing about that organization if they're joining a new team or a new place. And so they're going to go home at the end of every day exhausted and feeling stupid. You should assume that 85% of what you tell new hires in their first couple of weeks just goes in one ear and out the other. And it's not because they don't care. And it's not because they're dialed in. It's human nature. They're overwhelmed. There's only so much memory up here and capacity up here to acquire and then apply what we're hearing from all of the new people that are around us. And so I think as leaders, what we have to have is a little bit more patience and a commitment to some repetition, which is the support that we need to give folks to prevent them from being a part of that huge drop off in that first 90 days.
I love that the idea of like repetition, because, Chad, Ben will say the same thing for the 12th time. And finally, I'm like, oh, hey, that's really smart. And he's like, I've said it 11 times. But I think from just a philosophical standpoint, like our founder, Ben, in the main business unit that I get paid for, Chad, is one of those, like, he's okay saying the same message over and over and over. So everybody that person hearing it for the 12th time hears it a little bit different, but that person that just showed up today gets to hear it today and then again next week and the month after that. And we're okay with that, right? And I think the people that have been around here a long time understand that that's okay too, right? Like, because we I don't know. I think a lot of people just don't, they feel like they need to bring a new message, right? Yeah. I got to have something new to say all the time, when the reality is, if like that foundational message, getting it really instilled in people can be important.
I think if you outline when you're bringing somebody in, what are the 2 or 3 things that you want them to master first, and then you try to figure out how long that's going to take, you can build that repetition into those 2 or 3 areas of focus for that person. And so then your touch points with that person really just become about reinforcing the foundational things they need to learn, and then moving them through the process of being able to go deeper and acquire more skill around those things. And so repetition will inherently happen if you resist the urge to keep giving this person more and new and different too early, right? Allow them to master a handful handful of things, which then supercharges commitment because I'm valued, I'm making a contribution, this is meaningful work, my boss trusts me with these things. Those all sort of bake into the pie to create the kind of momentum that we want that employee to have early on.
Can you talk for a second, like the meaningful work piece, especially around like purpose and strengths? Like, I struggle with that a little bit. What, like, I don't know. When I think of like the brand new employee that comes in and they're like customer service, right? And all you're going to do all day long is respond to our clients, problems, complaints, and go out there and like, how do you give purpose to something like that, right? How do you give purpose to jobs where maybe like it's hard to conceive, how that job delivers some bigger purpose to the world or maybe even to their life?
Right. So there's the short-term answer and the long-term answer. So the short-term answer is by getting really good at recognition. And I'm not talking about recognition in terms of like, you've been here 10 years, here's a pin, way to go. Like tenure recognition is sort of a waste of time, no pun intended. But recognition for the contributions that someone makes. And those contributions may not always be transformational. It may just be the contribution of time. Like, hey, our front desk person spent 8 hours cleaning up all these old records so that then we could migrate to this new software system. That's huge. That's amazing. 8 hours of that kind of work is mind-numbingly awful sometimes. So let's celebrate that person. Let's not just say thank you. Let's say, thank you for diffusing that angry customer and spending 10 minutes on the phone with them. You seem to have a real gift for that, right? Getting really specific about how people are showing up and the impact that they're having. That's the short-term answer to how you create purpose. The long-term answer is that you have to connect the tasks and duties of someone's job to an actual difference that they make in the lives of others. And we have to root that. We have to anchor that in emotion. So let me give you an example, Bob. I've always said that whenever I've decided that I want to mentally check out and I don't want to think anymore in my job, that I'm going to go be a ticket taker at the movie theater. I think this might be one of the greatest jobs ever, right? If you think about it, A, I get to be inside all summer in the air conditioning. B, I probably get to see as many movies as I want. And C, how hard is that? Like, tear the ticket on your left, tear the ticket on your left. But if I owned a movie theater and I wanted to activate me, that young man who is there tearing tickets, I need to become a better storyteller. I need to connect that simple act of tearing tickets to making a difference in the lives of others. So here's what I would do. I would pull this young man into my office and I would say, hey man, I want you to do me a favor. Who is the longest married couple that you know? And this person's probably going to tell me about their aunt and uncle, maybe their parents, their grandparents. And I'm going to say, great, I want you to call them tonight and I want you to ask them to tell you the details of their first date. And I want you to come back and tell me about it. And now when this young man comes back and tells me about it and shares all the details of this special first date that happened, 40 some odd years ago, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, man, isn't it remarkable that they can remember so much detail about a night that happened so long ago? You know what? I bet there's a lot of people walking past you on their way into the movies that might be in the middle of a night they're going to remember for the next 40 years. Maybe this is the first date with their spouse. Maybe this is the first time they're taking their kid to a movie. Isn't it really cool that we get to be a part of that? And then I'm going to say, go ahead.
Chad's kind of a cold soul, so I don't know if he's getting a little emotional over there, but like just you telling that story to me as the kid who was out there ripping tickets, like, and look, maybe it's with, 25 more years of experience, not being a 20-year-old kid that mostly I'd just worried about like where I'm going to go party tonight or whatever. Right. But like there's emotion in that. There's purpose in that. Like I can feel it in my body as you kind of tell the story.
And that customer service scenario that you posed is the same thing, right? We're not dealing with a customer service situation. We're trying to end suffering, or we're trying to impart joy, right? I've worked with a lot of call centers and billing offices where that's really hard work, where you're making collections calls or people are calling you angry because they were billed incorrectly. And I just ask those folks to think about how difficult it must be. Let's say you've been through a hospitalization and you've had to navigate all that comes with that in your family and your health, and the stability of your life gets uprooted. And then you get a bill that's all screwed up. Like, there's been enough suffering at that point. And when I call up that collections person, or they call me, and I've got to navigate that conversation with them, in that moment, I have a chance as the worker to be a hero and to relieve suffering for them. I want to understand the emotional circumstances behind what they're dealing with before I get on the phone with them. And if I'm that call center worker's supervisor, my job is to give them capes, make them the hero, remind them that, do you know how many people this person has talked to who did not help them, and then they found you? And now you get the chance to be the one white, bright light in this person's life after they've had such difficulty resolving this issue. Let's do that, because that feels really good at the end of the day.
Okay, Joe, I need you to go speak to Comcast.
I don't know, man. Comcast is the devil.
Their people need to hear your message, because I'm never calling again. I mean, nothing makes me angrier than dialing the Comcast number and hearing that stupid Muzak get started. Okay. Now, Bob,
I'm a recovering Comcast subscriber.
Yeah,
I hear you.
I've cut the cable. They forced me to cut the cable just so I didn't have to go to customer service. All right. Bob, I'm not that cold.
They're literally the only place, the people that bring internet to my house. Like, I'm stuck. I cut the cable, but they're the only, I still haven't.
They're also the only company that everybody agrees when it comes to customer service.
They're the worst. Yes.
Everybody's out there going, yep, Comcast. I feel you on that one, Chad. Even if you've never used them, trust me. That's why they changed the name to Xfinity. They thought they'd fool us, right? Okay. So
right.
You'll never figure it out. Bob, he mentioned movies. So he got to my heart as soon as he mentioned movies. And I can remember taking my daughter to her first movie. I don't remember anything about the ticket taker. I don't remember anything about the person who gave her the popcorn or anything like that. I just remember the movie, and we missed part of it because she was at that age where she just couldn't, and she had to leave the theater for a bit, right? But I remember it was Finding Nemo. I'll remember it forever, the experience of taking her to her first movie. Okay, Joe, I like to take opportunities like this to challenge you for the sake of our audience. And I'll do this to Bob all the time in a lot of our episodes when we're talking about specifically leadership and development, things like that, because it always seems to me that the conversation ends up being business, 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 business. Okay, you're married to your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
You might not be her boss, and she's probably yours, yet not really, right? It's a mutual. Take this outside of work. Take this home, because we talk about health, wealth, leadership, and legacy here. We're talking about outside of just business when it comes to it. Take your lessons and apply them to being a parent, to apply them to being a better partner. Apply them outside of work for our audience.
Well, that's the whole argument for why we have to create a more humane employee experience. Whatever company we own, whatever job we're in, whatever kind of work we do, either for ourselves or for others. Because we've sort of moved through this experience where work has become the central focus of our lives. And how many people do you know who will complain that they're miserable at work, or I don't get to my kids' soccer games enough, or I'm not making enough to provide for my family at the level that I want to provide? And so the priorities that we have as human beings are really what should dictate the role that our work plays in our lives. There's a massive recalibration taking place around how work fits into people's lives. And this was the other thing that was triggered by the pandemic, right? We know that people had what were called pandemic epiphanies, right? We suddenly felt unsafe. We suddenly felt like, what if I get sick? We suddenly had to stay home. We suddenly had a lot of instability. And a lot of people looked around and said, boy, my life wasn't really working right before. And that's why so many people, for example, are refusing to return to in-person work, because they're saying, hey, I'm spending more time with my kids. I'm taking better care of my body because I'm eating healthier at home and I'm finding more time to exercise. I've given up that soul-crushingly awful commute, which has just sucked the life out of me both ways every single day. And I don't know if I'm going to have to change jobs, but I am never going back to the life that I had before. What we know is that the era of trying to find the best person for the job is over. What we have to do now is create the best job for the person. And we have to recognize that people don't want their jobs to dominate their lives. They want their job to fit into their life in that ideal sort of way. And it's interesting because we spend a lot of time in this country blaming people. We really want to argue that, boy, nobody wants to work anymore. We really want the problem to be work ethic. But then when you see people who are scratching and clawing and fighting their way for better wages or less hours or less demands at work, we call them entitled. We call them lazy. We treat it like it's a character defect when that very commitment is in and of itself character. I'm trying to better my life. I'm trying to be a better husband, father, neighbor, child. I've got parents that I'm the primary caregiver for, and I need to fill that role outside of work too. So all of the conversation that we are having right now about finding and keeping devoted employees is also about making work work for everybody. Imagine the massive transformation that you create across society if you make work work for everybody. Right? If you create job experiences for people that they don't just endure, but that they find fulfilling, you enhance their quality of life. You don't just crack the code for commitment. You actually create an environment where their relationships are positively impacted, their finances, their mental health, their physical health. You create societal change when you commit to a more humane employee experience. That's how I think of it in terms of, the intersection of work and life outside of work. I think it's all overlapping.
Love it.
Okay, Joe. In one sentence, no, I'm not going to do that.
I'm ready, man. I'm ready now.
You got to go back to minute 24.
I was going to ask him some other question. Ask him in one sentence, sum up the impact that Terminator has had upon, future society. I don't know, but
in Joe, one sentence, how bad was that ref's call in Super Bowl in 2005? That pass interference in the end zone. I don't know if you remember that, but in one sentence, no.
All right, here we go, Joe. Let's bring this home to our people. And it could be something you said. You could go back and give us that one sentence again. You could give us or it's something that hasn't come out of you yet that you just know our audience needs to hear. Give us the final thought from Joe before we start to get to the end of this opportunity with you.
Okay. Final thought. Please stop saying no one wants to work. We do not have a work ethic problem. What we know, we have the data to back this up. There's not an invisible mass of people who have decided to sit on the sidelines and not work. Unemployment in the U.S. right now is at record lows. There are only 3 months in the last 50 years. It's been lower than it is right now. We know that if you took every unemployed person in the U.S. right now and gave them a job, there would still be 5 million open jobs tomorrow. And so there is no staffing shortage. There's a great jobs shortage. The people who are having trouble hiring and who are saying no one wants to work, they just don't want to work for you. So turn the mirror inward and figure out, what do I need to change about my organization and how I lead and how I pay and how I support people to turn my workplace into a destination workplace? Because people generally do a great job when they believe they have a great job.
Love it.
They just don't want to work for you. Right there. Somebody listening to this just got punched in the nose with that sentence. And folks, I hope it wasn't you, yet there's someone listening that heard that. Look, he's the author of Employalty. His name is Joe Mull. Check it out on Amazon, wherever you can get your books, get your hands on them. We'll have probably the link in the show notes. I'm sure Dave will throw that in there for you. But check out Employalty. We want you to be able to create that destination workplace. And that's what Joe helps you do in the book. Joe, thanks so much for taking the time today and joining us here on the Win Make Give podcast.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. As always, we want you to come into the Facebook group. We want to hear your sports bitter moment that you still have, like Bob has so many of. We all have them. Come into the Facebook group. That's Win Make Give. Share with us in there your thoughts. Have fun in the conversation. Know that we'll be back with something. I don't know what the next episode has, yet it's going to be worth it. And until then, as always, do good.